This week, on the record, she's the first U.S. senator to ever give birth in office, and her daughters were conceived through IVF. Senator Tammy Duckworth's fight to protect that procedure, and her efforts to bring home the doctor who helped save her life in Iraq. How he escaped war-torn Gaza. Missouri Republicans prepared to debate in the race for governor. Senator Bill Eigel is on the record. And we check the record to find Missouri's unique ties to the central theme of Juneteenth. It's all coming up right now. Welcome to The Record. I'm Mark Maxwell. Democrats are ramping up their election year messaging, highlighting hardline Republican opposition to abortion and the ripple effect those policies can have on other procedures like IVF. She wrote the Right to IVF Act. Illinois Senator Tammy Duckworth is now on the record.
Hi, Mark.
Hey, Senator, thank you for joining us. I see that you and a number of your colleagues in the Senate are campaigning against the prospect of a second Trump term in this Project 2025. I think some of the materials from that campaign said that President Trump would, quote, end IVF as we know it. Do you think that's true in states like Illinois, too, where abortion and IVF are explicitly protected, or just in states like Missouri, where they consider their laws say that life begins at conception?
Well, that's exactly what will happen if Project 2025 moves ahead, is because they are trying to pass this state by state, this idea that a fertilized egg is a human child outside the uterus that has equal rights to the woman who would carry that child, which makes many of the procedures that are involved in IVF basically manslaughter or even potentially murder. You know, when you discard a non-viable fertilized egg because it would cause a miscarriage, if that non-viable egg is a human child, then that's manslaughter. And so Project 2025, that is one of the very extreme positions in 2025 that these former Trump officials are saying will be the playbook in a new Trump administration, and we simply can't afford to let that happen. And remember that President Trump himself has taken credit for placing to the Supreme Court three very conservative justices who basically helped overturn Roe v. Wade. And so you can see that they would take these attacks even further into the Supreme Court and potentially, you know, outlawing something nationwide that would affect Illinois.
But now, as he's seeking a second term, Donald Trump is telling Republicans privately that some of the states have gone too far, states with policies like Arizona's or Missouri's. Here in Missouri, Senator Josh Hawley just called your Right to IVF bill actually a, quote, war on people of faith. He said it would repeal the Religious Freedom Restoration Act in order to, quote, target Catholic hospitals and other religious hospitals. I just wonder if you'd like to respond or clarify anything there.
He's wrong. All my bill does is it says that Americans have a statutory right to assistive reproductive technology, which includes IVF, if you want to seek it. It also says that if you are an institution that wants to offer assistive reproductive technology like IVF, you can, but it doesn't force anybody to offer it. And if you are a healthcare professional and you want to offer assistive reproductive technology, then you can, only as long as it is in compliance with FDA regulations and in compliance with standard medical processes. It doesn't force anybody to offer it, it doesn't force anybody to seek it, and it doesn't force insurance to cover it. It just says if you want to cover it, if you want to seek it, if you need it in order to start a family, and if you are a health professional or facility that wants to offer it, then you can. So he's absolutely wrong. Obviously, he did not read the bill, or he is, before he voted against it, or he actually is trying actively to mislead the voters in Missouri, which would be shameful on his part.
So if your bill were to get through the Senate and eventually the House, you're saying that group health insurance plans and religious hospitals could still opt out of performing IVF procedures, perhaps under some right of conscience?
Correct. Yep. All my bill says is that if you want to provide it, you have the right to provide it. There's no opt-out. You would have to opt into providing it.
Along the lines of this 2025 project, one of the architects, a guy named Jonathan Mitchell, said, quote, we don't need a federal ban, he's talking about abortion medication, when we have Comstock. He's referring to that 19th century Comstock Act on the books. He says there's a smorgasbord of options in his words. He thinks the pro-life group should keep their mouths shut as much as possible until the election. I think he's suggesting that they think existing law on the books already gives them some levers to ban mifepristone or ban the mailing of those abortion pills. Can the Senate do anything now before the election, while it has a majority, to overturn that law or clarify its use?
Well, the Justice Department has said that Comstock does not apply right now, but obviously a Justice Department under a President Trump could change that opinion. Senator Tina Smith is going to be introducing a bill to overturn Comstock.
I see. While we have you, there was this compelling story we recently heard. There was this U.S. Army combat surgeon, Dr. Adam Hamawi, who helped save your life after you were shot down in Iraq in 2004, then more recently became trapped in Gaza, where he was treating patients alongside aid workers. I see that he has since safely returned. You've met with him to hear that story. How was he able to get out of that war-torn region?
So we were able to work very closely with the Israeli embassy as well as with the Jordanian embassy. In this case, they were very helpful in getting he and his colleagues on a priority list to be able to leave Gaza. We unfortunately were not able to get the replacement doctors and their medical equipment into Gaza. He was there for a short period of time. We've been working on this now for quite a while. Let me just make it clear. Hamas committed atrocities last October, and they need to release hostages that they're using as human shields, and they are responsible for the carnage that's happening in Gaza as well as happened in Israel. That said, we have to do everything we can to get as much humanitarian aid into innocent civilians in Gaza. And so we've been working to get doctors, either Doctors Without Borders, Med Global. There have been all sorts of different, aid groups that have been going in to bring aid in. And unfortunately, many of these convoys have come under attack. And so in Dr. Hamawi's case, we were able to get he and his colleagues' name by working directly with the Jordanian embassy in particular, so that they were able to leave through Jordan. But unfortunately, we could not get the replacement doctors along with the medical supplies in. I think they're on their way in now, and I am pleased to hear this new announcement that Israel is going to have temporary halt in firing during the daytime so that more aid convoys can get in.
Dr. Hamawi has said this war should end now. Those are his words. From your vantage point, what does victory look like for Israel?
I'm not interested in victory for Israel. I'm interested in a mutual permanent ceasefire. That means both Israel and Hamas has to agree to it, as well as a two-state solution. That's what I'm looking for. I will tell you that so far Israel has agreed to the last three ceasefire proposals, but the Hamas operational leadership in Gaza, in particular Mr. Sinwar, has rejected it. So at this point, it is Hamas that is rejecting the ceasefire, and quite sadly, they even put out a statement recently. I'm sorry, there was, I think, some text messages that were released recently that showed that Mr. Sinwar, the Hamas leader on the ground there in Gaza, said that the death of innocent Palestinians actually furthered his cause, which really shows how brutal these people are. But that doesn't mean that we should stop trying to get aid into innocent civilians in the region, and we should be working to get the hostages free.
All right. Thank you for your time, Senator. He was at the center of Republican infighting that stalled the Missouri Senate. Would Senator Bill Eigel do anything different if he were to win the race for governor? If you live in St. Louis, big changes could be coming to when you vote for city officials and what you call them. The Charter Commission recommended moving city elections back to August and November to better align with Missouri's state calendar, and renaming the gender-specific Board of Aldermen to the City Council. One amendment would expand the mayor's powers to hire candidates for key city positions.
Giving the mayor the ability to hire and fire the personnel director, the police chief, and the fire chief. I would not support those changes without making sure that the Board of Aldermen has input on that process.
Other proposed amendments would give the Board of Aldermen enhanced budget authority, would create a Department of Transportation and a public advocate office, and abolish the Board of Estimate and Apportionment, that powerful board that the comptroller sits on, bust that position down to from an elected one to a mayoral appointee position. In other news, Jamie Corley jumped into the Republican primary race for Secretary of State with a big cash splash. Business leaders at the helm of fintech company Square and Build-A-Bear backed Corley's bid to cut red tape for small businesses looking to put down roots in Missouri. She announced her launch with nearly 300 grand to start with, entering a crowded field of candidates trying to replace Secretary of State Jay Ashcroft. Republicans running for Missouri governor will debate on these airwaves in this studio Wednesday night in primetime July 24. Secretary of State Jay Ashcroft and Senator Bill Eigel immediately confirmed their appearance with us. Lieutenant Governor Mike Kehoe's team engaged in several meetings. They asked thoughtful questions, initially told a local newspaper they hoped to attend. Now they're claiming they have a schedule conflict. We're still holding an open podium for them in hopes they can resolve that conflict and still attend. He's one of those candidates running for governor, but trailing in the polls. Can Bill Eigel compete for the state's top job? He joins us next. Senator, thanks for joining us. This is our first time speaking to you since the conclusion of the legislative session this 2024. We talked to you right as it was about to end, but we did not yet know the outcome of the Republican push to bring about initiative petition reform, or to make it harder to change the state constitution. At the time, you called that the Republican Party's biggest priority. Looking back now, with the benefit of hindsight, is there anything you might have changed about your strategy?
No, in fact, our strategy actually got the initiative petition reform bill all the way to the 1 yard line. In fact, if you look back at where we started in January, we had a leadership team that was refusing to even move the bill, to even send the bill to committee. We, throughout the session, were very, very loud about our desire to get that passed. We sacrificed everything. We, being the Freedom Caucus, sacrificed everything, all of our political capital to move, which what I still believe is the #1 Republican priority of protecting our Constitution. And we got it down to the 1 yard line. And if it hadn't been for really the ball being fumbled at the 1 yard line by Senator Mary Elizabeth Coleman, and then our leadership team jumping in and allowing the Democrats to have that victory, I believe that we would have gotten over the finish line. It's really unfortunate. And I think this really continues to make my case that we're not going to be able to get these big Republican wins in the state of Missouri, having the same old go along, get along Republicans that are more interested in compromising with the Democrat Party than they are leading and delivering the big wins for the state of Missouri.
I wonder, you're running for a statewide office that would represent every district, red and blue alike, in the state. And I wonder if you would carry with you into the governor's mansion the agitator mindset. Do you see government as a vehicle for compromise or for conflict?
Well, I would tell you, I would carry into the governor's mansion the idea that we're going to protect our Constitution. I would carry into the governor's mansion that we're going to do these big, bold, red ideas that, quite frankly, are good for Republicans, they're good for Democrats, they're good for independents. For example, if you look throughout my plank of ideas, not only do we have extensive chat about protecting our Constitution, we're talking about getting rid of personal property tax. I'm the only candidate that's running on that platform, and getting rid of personal property tax, freeing our working and middle income class households from having to pay rent to government every December 1st for the crime of owning a car in the form of personal property tax. That's good for everybody. So there's a lot of ideas within the Republican platform that aren't just good for one group or another. They're good for everybody. I expect to carry that mindset in. And quite frankly, if there are those that don't believe in the Missouri that I'm talking about, which is a Missouri that is going to lead this country with these big, bold, red ideas. As you can see, I don't mind being the agitator, but I happen to think that the best way to bring Republicans together is, quite frankly, to call on them to do Republican things. It's something that Mike Parson has really never done during his time in office, and we're going to change that.
I appreciate a campaign about ideas and policies, certainly, but isn't your challenge one of persuading other people to agree with you on this? You need a majority to win an election, to get a bill to the governor's desk. That's been your challenge, because the splintering faction of the Freedom Caucus shrank instead of grew. It seems that it was a smaller number after session ended than it was at the outset.
Actually, if you talk about the ideas that I'm proposing that we pass, Missourians have already said repeatedly they want that Missouri. They show up every other year on the first Tuesday in November and demand that Missouri. They're demanding that we protect their Constitution. They're demanding that we lower the tax burden. So, yes, I acknowledge that it's been a little more difficult to convince the career politicians down in Jefferson City that they should actually listen to the people of this state and do what they promised in campaign season. But this is not a struggle to convince the people of Missouri. The people of Missouri already want this Missouri that I'm talking about. They're desperate for this Missouri where we're lowering the tax burden, where we're competing with the other big red states of this country, where we're protecting their rights. The only thing standing in between us and that Missouri are a few establishment Republicans down in Jefferson City.
President Trump has privately told Republicans in Congress and has publicly said that abortion policies and restrictions like the one in Arizona that say life begins at conception, very similar to the one here in Missouri, President Trump says those go too far. Is he wrong?
Well, I tell you what, I've always been very clear where I stand on the issue of life. I'm pro-life. I'm 100% pro-life. Not only is it the destruction of innocent life, but I'll tell you what, abortion hurts women. If you look at the effects of women who have undergone an abortion, you're looking at much higher suicide rates. You're looking at much higher mental health diagnosis rates. And it's something that I think that we've got to make a decision whether or not we value protecting the women in our state. Absolutely do. And I'm going to look at every opportunity to protect women, whether it's from abortion, whether it's from everything else going on in the state.
You think the state needs to protect women from their own choices?
Well, like I said, the women who have undergone an abortion, yes, women have seen much higher suicide rates who have undergone an abortion than average demographics. Women who have undergone an abortion see much higher diagnoses of mental health problems. So yes, it absolutely is traumatizing women physically, certainly, but also mentally. So it's something that we've got to be aggressive about. I don't have a problem being bold in our statement that we're going to be pro-life whenever and wherever we can.
I wonder what that looks like moving forward. Should you become governor after this vote where Missouri could very well overturn the ban on abortion and enshrine its access in the state constitution, would you respect the will of the voters at that point, or would you do anything from your perch in the governor's office to undermine or restrict access to abortion after the fact?
I'm always going to be pro-life. I'm always going to do everything that I can to reduce the number of abortions happening in the state of Missouri. So, and by the way, I'm not convinced that the people of the state are going to overturn the abortion ban. Remember, these are the same Missourians that have been showing up every 2 years, electing the most pro-life supermajorities, maybe anywhere in the country, down to Jefferson City in elected office to represent them. So I think there's a long way to go before we get to that. But I am never going to change my position on being pro-life and standing up for not only innocent life, but for the women of this state and protecting them.
Senator Eigel, thank you for your time.
Thanks so much for having me.
America celebrated Juneteenth this week, a federal holiday honoring the freedom that would eventually stretch far enough west to unshackle the last enslaved Black Americans. It took 900 days from the time Abraham Lincoln first signed the Emancipation Proclamation in Washington, D.C., until Union soldiers finally carried that letter of liberty to Galveston, Texas. It's been said that justice delayed is justice denied, and Juneteenth commemorates that cost of delay. The celebration of freedom also offers us a chance to reflect on why we often put injustice off until tomorrow, next week, next election, or the next generation. Juneteenth often focuses on that delay between Lincoln's words becoming deeds, but the delay had dragged on long before that. In fact, Lincoln himself delayed and disciplined a Missouri general who would have freed enslaved people more than 2 years prior. Before it was the party of Lincoln, it was the party of John C. Fremont. They called him the Pathfinder, a westward bound explorer who represented the Republican Party in the 1856 race for president unsuccessfully. That was 4 years before America would elect a Republican president for the first time ever. But Fremont did not have much of a stomach for Lincoln's deliberations. He was more impatient, more a man of action. When the war first broke out in 1861, Fremont took command of a large Union militia in Missouri, declared martial law statewide, and ordered soldiers to seize property of any Confederate sympathizers, including enslaved property. Lincoln, who feared the Union forces might not be able to withstand an uprising from within the nation's interior, commands him to rescind that order and quickly relieved him of his duties. 2 years later, Lincoln would rely on those very same wartime powers to pen his Emancipation Proclamation, which only applied to Southern Confederate states and not to the one slave state in the Union, Missouri. 11 years after Lincoln's death, abolitionist Frederick Douglass said had he put the abolition of slavery before the salvation of the Union, he would have inevitably driven from him a powerful class of the American people and rendered resistance to rebellion impossible. He said, viewed from the genuine abolition ground, Mr. Lincoln seemed tardy, cold, dull, and indifferent, but measuring him by the sentiment of his country, a sentiment he was bound as a statesman to consult, he was swift, zealous, radical, and determined. John C. Fremont was right. He was just right 2 years too soon. And in Lincoln's view, his big mistake was picking a fight before he had enough allies on his side to win it. That does it for us this week. Thanks for watching. We'll see you right back here at the same time next week. Until then, we're off the record.